probably seen those pictures of cows in India wandering leisurely around the roads and even causing traffic jams because they are considered sacred. But what does it mean for a cow to be sacred? And how does this reconcile with the fact that India has the largest dairy industry in the world and the fourth largest beef industry in the world? I'm talking today to Yamini Narayanan. She's an associate professor of international development at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia. She delves into this complex issue in her book Mother Cow, Mother India. It unveils the cow's role as a highly controversial and politicized animal in Indian society. Well, there's a lot to talk about. Thank you for joining us, Yamini.
Thank you so much for having me, Esther. I've been really looking forward to a conversation, so thank you for
Excellent.
inviting me.
Yes, and you're actually located in Melbourne right now. It's about 4 in the afternoon, I believe.
That's right. That's right. So I'm in
Excellent.
Melbourne and it's early in the morning for you, isn't it?
In Amsterdam, that's right, 8 a.m. Yeah, actually, I really try to do all my interviews face to face, but once in a while, just someone on the other end of the world turns out to be like super, super interesting, and I really need to talk to him or her. And this time it's you. Your book really blew me away.
I'm honored to
So,
hear that. Thank you so much for taking the time to read the book because it's not always the case that people want to engage very deeply with a topic that can be
oh,
difficult to
really?
read.
Yeah,
And so I really appreciate
yeah.
your resilience and your commitment. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Okay. And just for our listeners, it's good to tell that this time we're actually recording the interview also on video. So if you prefer to watch the video, the show notes to that will be the link to that will be in our show notes. So first of all, Yamini, growing up in India and I believe a Hindu family, what was your relationship to the cow?
This is such a fantastic question to start off with because what was our relationship to the cows? I would say we didn't have one. We didn't have a relationship per se with animals at all. We never really thought about why they were there in the first place because they were just considered to be part of the urban environment. There was no awareness that they might be abandoned because they're no longer lactating. There was no awareness that they were consuming every cow on the street. Honestly, would have about 20 to 60 kilograms 80 kilograms of toxic material in them because they are what are they eating? What is available to eat on the streets after all? It's garbage, right? And India has open waste everywhere. So, the fact that they were feeding on so much garbage, cows would rip off posters off the wall to eat them. So
They were
we
not being
just
fed.
no, no,
Despite
no.
being sacred, they were not being fed or taken care of.
No,
Ah,
no. So the idea of cows as sacred was something which actually, as I said, became a very political concept since 2014.
14. Yeah,
It is
yeah.
also the case that Hinduism per se regards all life as sacred, right? Like, so, rats have a sacred space in Hinduism, elephants have cows, eagles, peacocks. I mean, there's virtually all life and
Yeah.
all plant life as well. Like, there's a strong history of worshipping plants in India as well and trees in India.
Uh-huh.
So, to that extent, all life is considered sacred. And that in some ways also makes it very unexceptional, right? All life
Yeah.
is sacred. Like, you don't necessarily make a deal out of it. So the fact that the cow was specifically sort of excavated from this sort of mass of sacred life
Uh-huh.
and then made politicized. So what is interesting about the cow is not necessarily that the cow is a sacralized as a concept, but a political concept. Like it's
Uh-huh.
the fact that this sacralization is political.
Yeah, and before we go into that, I think it would be good to explain a bit about the political situation in India. And before you do that, I ask you to put the mic just down a little bit more towards your chin, if that's all right. Yeah,
Of
fantastic.
course, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah. So yeah, what happened in 2014, and what is the current political situation? Because that's vital to understand how the treatment of the cow currently is in India.
Yeah. So in 2014, the BJP-led government, that's the Bharatiya Janata Party, that basically stands for the Indian People's Party. They came to power in India in 2014. They have been trying to consolidate power in India since independence. And this is to just to sort of step back almost 75 years to the colonial movement when the freedom movement was ongoing and it's at its peak in India, and it was very clear that at some point the British were going to leave, and there was all these concerns about what kind of country would India be. Would it be a Hindu country or a Muslim country or a secular country?
Yeah.
And this was a very split binary debate. As you know, eventually the country was split into Pakistan, East Pakistan and West Pakistan. Of course, East Pakistan became Bangladesh. So there was a strong there was a strong movement in favor of Hindu and Muslim republics respectively, and
And
the
the
Islamic.
idea was that the Islamic would go to Pakistan and the Hindu part would stay in India. Was that the
Exactly,
idea? Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So there was a strong movement within India as well for India then to become a Hindu state. And of course, India ultimately was a secular state, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, and that was something that was never acceptable to the Hindu right wing. And they have been trying since independence to do their best to try and remake India into a Hindu state.
Uh-huh.
And they have never given up. They have never given up trying, and they have made brief forays into power. But what happened in 2014 was that they came with an overwhelming majority and successfully entrenched themselves in power. And this is actually has parallels with the uprising and with the rise of the right pretty much globally, right? Like there
Yeah.
has been this sort of resurgence of the right wing pretty much globally. So in India as well, they came to power in 2014. And since then, they have been trying a number of strategies to sort of remake, to restore in their vision, they are restoring India as a Hindu state.
Yeah, because I think it's good to say that not actually all the Muslims went to Pakistan, right? There was some Muslims actually still stayed in India.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think your listeners might be really interested to know that India is actually the second largest Muslim state.
Oh, honestly. Huh.
Yeah, so after
Ah.
Indonesia,
Uh-huh.
India is the second largest Muslim state.
Uh-huh.
I believe that we definitely have more Muslims in India than we do in Pakistan,
Uh-huh.
and
About 15%, I believe, currently,
that's
and like
yeah,
yeah.
15 to 18%, and
Uh-huh.
we are yeah. So the minority in India is a very unique category because it's a very significant minority. It's not like a minority in other countries where they might be a really like demographically very small. Like the
Uh-huh.
Muslim minority in India is a significant minority in India,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a
Yeah. It's a
demographically
major
significant
minority.
major
Yeah.
minority.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Um, so
Yeah.
the Hindu right, since they came back to power, have been trying a number of approaches to consolidate and remake themselves as a Hindu state. Now, one of the approaches that was deployed was cow protectionism.
Yeah.
And in this vision, the cow represents the Hindu state. So the body
Uh-huh.
politic of the cow
Yeah.
represents the body politic of a Hindu Mother India.
Could you explain that body politics? What do you mean with that?
So basically, if you were to think about the nation as a body, that
Yeah.
must be
Uh-huh.
protected
Yeah.
because the country is Mother India. It's like we that there is a lot of sort of feminized narratives, emotive narratives that are used to sort of establish the relationship between nation and the citizen.
Mm-hmm.
And the mother is one of the most emotive
Ah.
sort of relations that you can establish between nation and the citizen, right? So if your relationship with the nation is one where the nation is a mother, it's a deeply intimate, emotionally tight and bound up relationship. And this body of Mother India is also contained in the body of the cow. So the
Yeah.
cow represents the Hindu nation. So the
Ah.
mother cow. So the cow is conceptualized politically, I mean, and in the scriptures for sure, as sacred, as goddess, and as a mother. And
Yeah.
this sounds very nice. Like, what could possibly be wrong um, with revering the cow in
Exactly.
such
To
glorious terms as
to be
sacred?
sacred must be the best thing to be, right?
Exactly, to be sacred, to be a goddess, to be
Yeah.
above human as a goddess, right?
Yeah.
And to be one of the most venerated relationships within humans, like is the mother-child relationship, one of the most venerated. So the cow represents the body of the nation. So therefore, India is one country which is extremely unique. I think about 29 states in India out of 34 or 35 states have prohibitions on cow slaughter as
Wait
a
a
way of.
second. 29 out of 40. Out of 34 states prohibit the slaughter of cows.
Slaughter of cows. I mean,
Uh-huh.
they are quite different. I mean, some of them have an outright slaughter on all animals. Some of them have, sort of, some of them have more conditions. If they are over the age of 15, that perhaps they
Uh-huh.
can be. If they're male, that they might be. But more or less, about 29 states have a prohibition on cow slaughter
Uh-huh.
as a result, because
Yeah.
they are they are sacred, they are representative of the Hindu state, right?
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
they have a cow slaughter
Yeah,
prohibition.
yeah. So,
uh,
so again, this sounds wonderful, but I think before going into the slaughter and the beef, we should get into the dairy because that's where the whole cow story starts. And
yeah,
Yamini, you have been, I believe, for about 7 years, followed the cow throughout the entire dairy chain. You have visited all the parts of the chain and spoken to the people and seen the cows. Could
yes,
you maybe take us along to one of your dairy farm visits, and what is it like? What did you experience?
that is such, I don't think I've ever been asked this question before. Take me to a dairy farm in India. um the day so there are how we think of a dairy farm in India is very different to the kind of dairy farms that you see in Australia, where there is open grazing, and um, it has there's a bucolic image to
Yep,
dairying in Australia. I mean, of course,
old-fashioned farmer, the cow in the backyard feeling.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, we all know the problems of the dairy industry, but outside looking in, it's a very bucolic image of one of harmony and peace. And
Hmm, hmm.
but in India, most of the farming is extremely small scale. So most farmers only own anything between sometimes 2 to 3 cows. And a large dairy farm might have about 500 cows or 1,000 cows,
Uh-huh,
but most farms would have about, on average, about 20 to 25 cows.
uh-huh. Yeah.
And they are in very intensive farming. They are concentrated feeding operations. That's how you would refer to them. Basically, the cows are basically chained all day. There's no room to move. Oftentimes, the cows will be inside a room, and that's where they stay for
Ah.
most of their lives until they're taken out, until they're either sold underground for slaughter, or they might just be abandoned on the road, and that's when they get their first taste of freedom.
You say they're chained all day, so they're with their heads they're chained to the wall or whatever, and they're not
Yes,
able all
yes,
day. Uh-huh,
yes.
uh-huh,
It is an
uh-huh.
extremely normalized image, right? It
Ah,
is so normalized, and I remember one of my reviewers commenting on the fact that there was this image that I kept repeating through the book about them constantly being chained, and often in short leashes. The reason why they're chained and in very short leashes, sometimes their faces are touching the ground. That's how tightly they're chained, is because the cow is, of course, wanting to resist and wanting to move and wanting
yeah.
to, getting frustrated, and oftentimes they will attack another cow. So to stop all of that, they are actually really intensively chained,
Phew.
and they're kept chained that way forever. So you have your farms in urban areas, especially, which are very intensive. Even in villages, increasingly they are very, very intensive, because there used to be a time when cows could be taken out to commons, to pasture lands, common pasture lands, or forest areas for grazing. All of those habitats and ecologies have more or less disappeared. So there is a lot of intensive um, tying in regional India as well. Now, the other kind of dairying that is kind of unique to India are the sacred sort of dairies, right?
Yeah.
Which are also called gaushalas. Now, in these dairies, they will almost always only have indigenous Indian breed cows, like the
Ah.
Gir, the Sahiwal, the Red Sindhi. So these are the kind of cows that they will keep in gaushalas,
Ah.
because indigenous cows are considered to be the true sacred cows. Now, this again,
Ah.
there's an economic rationale behind this. Right, because India has the largest dairy herd in the world. I think in 1997 we became the largest dairy producing country,
How
and
many
since
how many cows?
I would say about 300 million cows in
300
India,
million. Yeah.
and it's one of the largest dairy herds in the world. As I said, in 1997, India became the largest dairy producing country, and it's a status that we have maintained continuously since then, right? So this, and of course, even at the time of establishing Article 48 in the Indian Constitution, because the Article 48 in the Indian Constitution um, is there is no national ban on cow slaughter in India because it's a secular country and it's a very, very highly contested idea, right?
Uh-huh.
Because other religions don't consider cows sacred, and it's intertwined with livelihoods, with butchery, with leather industries, etc. So we don't have a national ban on cow slaughter in India. So what we have is Article 48 of the Indian Constitution, is located under what is called the directive principles of state policy, which basically only means that the Constitution recommends that
Uh-huh.
states institute cow slaughter.
Okay.
And then it is left to the state as to how they do it and what they do with it, right? So, as I said, most of the states have taken it up.
Yeah. So again, Yamini, because we're already at the slaughtering, but I was still, we are getting there, but I
Yeah.
still wanted to know a bit more about the dairy industry because you said there were these kind of normal dairy operations in the city, but then there's also the more religious, the more like cow shelter places, which are called
Hmm.
gaushalas.
Hmm.
Do the cows have a bit of a better life over
Hmm.
there? No?
Absolutely not.
Huh?
Absolutely not. Because the logics, the fundamental logics of the dairy industry operate as much in a gaushala. So you go to a gaushala, you will find all the lactating cows in one, tied up in one pen, all the calves separated, living in a separate calf pen.
Uh-huh.
Um, I have never found a gaushala which actually allows mother and infant to be together,
To be together, huh?
because they can't, because they are actually a dairy producing space as well, right? So which means that the calf cannot be near the mother.
Yeah.
So they also shunt their calves outside.
Are the cows
And
normally taken away immediately for slaughter, or how does it normally work with the cows? Sorry, the calves.
so if the calves are female, then they will be recycled back into dairying.
They
Now
become a
if the
dairy cow. Yeah.
Exactly. If the calves are male, then there is again there's an underground system, because
Hmm.
again we are not allowed to legally slaughter cows as calves in India either, right? So buffalo calves, yes, actually buffalo calves,
Ah.
there are authorized abattoirs in India that have buffalo calf slaughtering operations. When it comes to cow calves, all of this becomes amalgamated within the shadow economy, the illegal
Uh-huh.
economy,
Uh-huh.
right? So
Yeah.
we have a very functional, highly organized, informal, illegal, even criminal economy, because because cow slaughtering has basically been made illegal. Basically, you can think of Indian dairying itself as illegal, because if you think of the dairy production
Yeah.
continuum as starting from breeding all the way to slaughter,
Yeah.
and if one segment of the dairy production continuum has to go underground, then it basically compromises really the whole production
Yeah.
industry. Yeah,
But somehow the politicians didn't are turning a blind eye to the fact that these animals in the end have to go somewhere. They think they're living happily ever after in a luscious green
yeah.
piece of field, and then they die naturally. I mean, what do they think?
It's the narrative, because what we do is gaslight ourselves into thinking what is acceptable and comfortable to us, right? So
Yeah.
in India the narrative is, oh well, when the cows are no longer milking, they can just go to gaushalas to retire, as though it's a retirement home, right? Or people will just look after them on the streets because they're out on the streets, no one is actually stopping them, and that is great. Like, we don't actually even consider how difficult life on the road is for any animal, human or otherwise. Yeah. So, and they're out on the streets. So, and the problem with gaushalas as well is that they are severely underfunded.
But these cow shelters, that actually are dairy operations at the same time. They don't just
Absolutely.
okay. Yeah.
Absolutely, because
Yeah.
they are not seen, they are different from a farmed animal sanctuary, where you're very clear that you're liberating them from the use. Yeah. In a gaushala, they are only being saved from slaughter, because slaughter is seen as the only harm that is done to
Yeah.
cows.
Ah, yeah.
The
Okay.
impregnation, the milking, all of that are not seen as harms, because the cow is our mother.
Ah, yeah.
Because the cow
And
is my mother, and what is my fundamental right from my mother? It is
poof,
it is breast milk, isn't it? Like from the outset of birth, my fundamental right, the first right that I have from my mother is milk.
Yeah.
So if the cow is my mother, then there is really no moral problem in consuming her milk.
Yeah, no one is considering how the milk is being taken and what happens to the calves.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely,
Yeah.
and also, we also will have narratives about, oh, the calf is getting milk. We're giving her, the calf is getting a little bit of milk, and then the rest is for us because the cows produce so much more milk than the calf needs, because the cows have also been bred to produce more milk than, a cow might only produce about 5-6 liters a day, which would actually taper off as the calf grows older, whereas you have your modern selectively bred cows and they're producing 40 liters a day, 60 liters a day, which is absolutely in excess of what a calf needs. But there is no consideration about how this actually came about, and this is
Uh-huh.
actually extremely unnatural for a cow to be producing that much amount of milk. And
Yeah.
and people also don't consider that there is the actual act of lactating is an extremely labor intensive job, right?
Mhm.
Now I don't have children, but I've spoken to a number of friends and family who have children, right? And you ask any breastfeeding mother and she will say that it's labor intensive, it's calorie intensive, and they're almost chronically hungry during these periods. Now if a cow is producing 60 liters of milk a day, they are inevitably in a chronic state of hunger
Mhm.
because there is so much calories that are being drawn into producing lactate, right?
Yeah.
And these are the kind of considerations that simply are not lie outside of public imagination
So
because
even though this cow is sacred, is our mother, is the highest creature we could think of. At the same time, we just take her milk without considering how she makes it and how she lives.
exactly. So one of
Yeah.
the leading causes of death in a dairy farm is very much maternity dystocia, which is when they are unable to push the calves out, and the calf actually gets stuck and they're unable to push the calves out.
Mhm.
There are a whole spectrum of causes which are directly related to the fact that they have very little to no maternity care, and many of these cows shouldn't anymore be made pregnant at all, and they will still continue to do it because even if the calf dies and even if the pregnancy is unsuccessful insofar as birth goes, there is a chance that the cow might still lactate for a while anyway, and
Yeah.
ultimately it's all about the milk, isn't it?
Phew. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is a very, very common cause.
Yeah. So I guess it's time now to jump to the most amazing part, and you already touched it, which is the slaughter.
Yeah.
So there's about 300 million cows in India, as you said. Many cows, after a certain time, they start to produce less milk, even if you keep impregnating them. So they're like spent, they're left over. And then there's obviously the calves. So there must be about 300 million cows and calves that also need to go somewhere. But this
Mm-hmm.
is where the government turns a blind eye and says they're not allowed to be slaughtered, but at the same time, they don't have any space to keep them anywhere. And
Exactly.
India turns out to be the fourth largest beef producer in the world,
Yes. Yes.
even though in most states it's prohibited. So, Jamini, explain to us, how does this system work?
Yes. So just to India's beef claims, just to state that India's exports supposedly come from buffalo beef, cara beef. It's called
Ah,
cara beef, right?
which is allowed.
Which is allowed. So
Ah,
most authorized export-oriented slaughterhouses will only slaughter buffalo. And from an
ah,
animal rights point of view, that is a meaningless difference, of course. But insofar as the beef economy goes, all of India's exports, authorized licensed exports, come from buffalo beef or cara beef. Now, I have visited a number of these authorized export-oriented slaughterhouses. So they're export-oriented and they have no domestic sales, right?
uh-huh.
And they actually, I was wondering, I mean, are they sneaking in cows or,
Yeah.
but they really aren't, because the thing is the risk is too high.
Okay.
So from what I could understand, it is simply not worth the risk. Right? It
Yeah.
is simply not worth the risk. They have so many, many um, sorts of rules and regulations to adhere to in terms of health, public health, sanitation, etc. Because it is for export, it has to be of a really highly sanitized, hygienic quality. So they have so many rules and regulations to observe. And in a volatile environment where the Hindu right is in power, the last thing that they want to do is to compromise or
By
risk.
slaughtering a sacred Hindu cow.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and risk, shutdowns and things like
Uh-huh.
that. So it wouldn't
Yeah.
be worth it. They just want to be able to export. So they pretty much only um, slaughter buffaloes and buffalo
Yeah.
calves.
And I believe you can find their meat in the US in fast food burgers, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
most of India's beef is exported to North America. So Canada and United States actually do import a bit of Indian beef. It's interesting because they are also among the largest producers of beef themselves. But the
Yeah.
hamburger market in North America consumes so much beef that they pretty much their beef imports are as high as their domestic beef production.
Uh-huh.
So they're extremely high. But India's other major importers are mainly from Southeast Asia because they want cheap beef. And of course, Indian beef is cheaper, amongst the cheapest beef. And also the Middle East imports
Ah,
Indian beef because
okay.
Indian beef is, I mean, Indian cows and buffaloes are slaughtered through the halal method.
Ah, okay.
And that is important for Islamic societies. So they also import beef from India because of the method, the mode of slaughtering,
Yeah.
right?
All right. So these export-oriented slaughterhouses, they do things completely legal. They only slaughter
From
buffaloes.
from what I could see, yes.
Yeah.
From what I could see, yes, because they just didn't. The risk wasn't worth it for them.
Uh-huh.
They
Yeah.
were like, even financially, there is nothing in it for us. Because see, when you try and slaughter a cow in India, there has to be some measure of desperation and vulnerability as to why you would take such a big risk,
Yeah.
right? when Because states like Gujarat, for example, they actually have life imprisonment for cow slaughter.
No way.
Yes.
Ah, okay.
So
Wow.
Gujarat is where the Prime Minister Modi comes from, right? And that state actually has life imprisonment. They actually wanted to institute capital punishment for cow slaughter. I mean, that never went through. But the risks are so high, and there's been this escalated incidents of lynchings, beatings, rape, killing of Muslim and Dalit butchers and transporters for killing cows. Now, you would only do that if you were extremely impoverished, vulnerable,
Uh-huh.
desperate, marginalized, etc.
Yeah.
If you had the comfort of owning an authorized scientific mechanized slaughterhouse, you're clearly not in that position.
Hmm. Yeah. So then you mentioned there's this export-oriented slaughter industry which only slaughters buffaloes and doesn't take the risk to slaughter the holy Indian cow. But then
Hmm.
there's also obviously the industry more underground which does take the risk of slaughtering the Indian purebred cow. How does
Absolutely.
this go?
Absolutely. Now, where cows are slaughtered in India falls broadly in two categories. One is a lot of cows are actually slaughtered s- in state-owned slaughterhouses. Okay, so the government actually will just simply turn a blind eye. There are so many cities where um, we would like try and look at they would we would go to the abattoirs, and there would be goats and there would be pigs on the one side. Can we see the bovines? Can we see the buffaloes? No, we couldn't see the buffaloes. Why can't we see the buffaloes? There was always this strong suspicion that there were also cows in there, right? And they didn't
Ah,
want us to see. But even there have been like numerous reports of police raids, etc., of Indian municipal slaughterhouses also slaughtering cows at the same time. And these are so highly governed by these sort of criminalized nexus. They're not, it's hard to say that they're criminals because they're doing work which is very risky. So their labor has almost been made criminalized, right? And there are and so, so there's a lot of cow slaughtering that does happen in state-owned facilities. But there's also an entirely large slaughtering of cows just in backyard slaughterhouses. And these backyard
yeah.
slaughterhouses, we are not talking about a small little backyard. We're talking about entire suburbs. We're talking about entire villages. We're talking about entire regions which are just dedicated. And because they're doing something so risky and vulnerable, they are actually also very dangerous environments to get into, because there is a lot of, they can be, they're severely armed as well, like, because it's very difficult to get into these sorts of areas, because they are performing such risky labor on such a large scale that they are also very fortified,
Yeah.
so very
Yeah.
difficult to enter.
And
But
are,
at the
are these mostly the people from the lower Indian caste, the untouchables, I think they're called?
Yeah, yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So most of the labor force that is engaged in transportation as well as butchery
Yeah.
come from the Dalit groups, as well as low caste Muslim, like impoverished, very very poor Muslim groups. So these
Mm-hmm.
are amongst the poorest and the most marginalized sections of Indian society,
Mm-hmm.
and they are the ones that are performing these lot of. It's not just dirty or difficult labor as it is elsewhere, like in, like, Tim Patrick talks about the fact that it's the most vulnerable of populations in the US as well, that are working in US slaughterhouses. Oftentimes they're undocumented immigrants,
Yeah.
etc., who are working, and so the, highly vulnerable cohorts of population, typically just about everywhere, that are working in slaughterhouses. But in the case of India, it's not just difficult work, or it's not just dirty work, or whatever you think of. It's also deeply risky work,
Uh-huh.
because it's
Yeah.
actually criminal labor,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And yet, this criminal labor is required to sustain the legal dairy industry.
Yeah. 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 That's
But that
it's
legal dairy industry has had this one. So, in every other country, we understand that the dairy continuum starts with breeding, and then on to, impregnation, and then, there's the milking period, and that goes on for several years. And then eventually, the production continuum moves towards slaughterhouses, because when cows are no longer productive, or if they are male, they head towards. So that it's very much part of the dairy production continuum.
yeah.
In India, somehow we managed to evade that. That is the narrative. The slaughter segment, we just somehow managed to evade it, like,
Yeah.
uniquely somehow in India we don't need to do that.
You turn a
so
blind eye to it.
so
Yeah.
this segment of slaughtering simply goes underground in India.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about it, we actually have one of the largest scales of cow slaughtering in the world. It all happens underground.
Yeah.
So it's a
But
highly organized, efficient networked
yeah.
system
But
of cow transportation as well as slaughter, because you got to be able to transport them as well.
exactly, exactly. And this chapter, I think, to me, was most intriguing in your book because something happens between the legal dairy part and the underground slaughtering part. And that is the cows have to be transported, and there is like an enormous system of well, I would say Wild West situation in which people do this transport. Well, could you explain it? Because I know you have been in one of those trucks following the transport. You have seen what's happening. Could you explain that to us?
So what happens in India is that you can clearly transport cows. Like, transportation is not illegal, right? So when you go to a market, now this entire thing starts basically from the sale of a cow. Now,
Yeah,
as I said, most dairy farmers have maybe 2 cows, 3 cows, 5 cows, 20 cows. So they have very, very few cows. So there's a clear network system. Someone comes and picks up their cow from their houses, right? And then takes them to the market. Now, and these are extraordinarily disorienting experiences for the animal that has been looked after in one particular household and
hmm
suddenly ripped and taken to, these are herd animals.
hmm
They are very 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 uncomfortable with the kind of like constant mobility and constant movement from place to place to place. So so what happens, where this obfuscation begins is actually at the markets. Now, if you go to a bovine market, a cattle market in India, I mean, there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cows and buffaloes and calves and bulls, and so they're all there. Now, the purpose of transportation is unclear. It is not, I could be transporting
yeah,
a cow.
sure,
I could just say I'm using the cow for dairying. If it's a bull, I'll say, I'm using the cow for traction,
yeah,
because a lot of Indian farming uses bull traction, right? And of course, you will also find trucks that are absolutely stuffed with animals. I'm talking about no breathing room. They're on top of each other.
no way,
Sometimes they are tied, their heads are tied to their legs, and they're like tied
man,
round like pancakes, and then they're stacked on top of each other.
Oof.
right?
Yeah.
You will not believe the conditions of transportation.
So how does the police determine whether it's a legal transport to, let's say, to bring the cow somewhere else, or whether it's illegal because it's sent to slaughter?
This can be hard to discern
Yeah.
actually, whether
Yeah.
it is legal or illegal. Now when they're packed in such tight conditions, very clearly it is illegal transportation, because
Uh-huh.
no farmer wants to receive his animal in a damaged condition. So for sure, that is, if they are packed in such a tight condition, they are
Yeah.
airless. In fact, some of the animals are already dead or dying,
They
right?
are already. Oof.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't matter, because they're going to die anyway. So when they are packed in that type of tight conditions, and oftentimes they would have been on the road for days, and you can just make out from the smell of urine and the dung, you can actually make out that these animals have been in the truck for a long time, right? It's like it's just very, these are the ways in which you can discern it. Now it's and yet and also at the same time, like when they're transporting cows, even in more humane conditions, the police, or cow vigilantes will make mistakes. So there was this Muslim dairy farmer. He was a dairy farmer, a Muslim man, Pehlu Khan. He was transporting cows for dairy purposes, and he was caught by the cow vigilantes, and he was
Maybe, sorry,
lynched and
Yamini.
killed. Yeah,
Maybe you should
sorry.
first explain what a cow vigilante is.
Right, right. So a cow vigilante is a term that is used to describe self-appointed protectors of cows, and they are usually working for the Hindu right, for the Hindu state, for the Hindu
Ah.
Mother India. Right, so they are self-appointed. But at the same time, they also get a lot of support from all these political parties to carry out their work. And what they do is they make it their business to sort of, it's almost like a form of microterrorism. So what they do is that they will stop trucks that are filled with with cows,
Okay.
and then they will basically beat up the driver, sometimes get the animals off, and then burn the trucks. And of course that's a
Oh.
huge loss
Yeah.
for these people. And beating, lynching, killing, all of that has been on the rise, like escalated and exponential since 2014. So these cow vigilantes sort of take on this cause, and they basically operate as some type of a terror network, really,
Yeah.
right? And it's also, and I do describe in my book as to how do they know that a cow filled with trucks is coming. How do they
Yeah.
know that? And it's
Uh-huh.
actually quite interesting, because this kind of knowledge comes from insider information. So, and this information works both ways. So the cow vigilantes oftentimes will have insider information from within the butcher community itself.
Oh, really?
Yes. So because let's say I'm a butcher and I want to protect my business, I'll say, look, I'll give you information, just leave me and my family alone. Because it's survival at the end of the day, right? So I'll just say, leave me and my family alone, and I'll give you information. And I'll
And
tell
then they
you
give
that,
the information like there's a truck coming
yep,
tomorrow at this time.
yep,
Ah,
there's
yeah.
a truck coming, passing through these routes, etc. So make sure that you're there. And then when the truck and this works the other way around as well. So the butchers also will have insider information, oftentimes from the Hindu right parties, or cow vigilantes. I mean, they may not be necessarily directly affiliated with parties. They may just be, there's a lot of unemployed youth in India, and they suddenly get a purpose. And a lot of them spoke to me about just their lack of purpose, and they were unemployed, and life was frustrating, and suddenly they have this purpose to save the country and to save the cow and do something so noble. And this is how basically recruitment into terrorism happens more generally as well, because terrorism is also dirty work,
Yeah.
right? The actual act of engaging in that labor is not something that is particularly pleasant. So there's a particular recruitment process happens, and those who are actually recruited into this kind of labor are quite vulnerable in many ways, socially, economically, etc. So oftentimes they find their purpose in doing these things.
Yeah.
And oftentimes the butchers also will have their informants from this group, or sometimes they also have their informants from within the police,
Oh,
right?
really? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. and
Yeah.
and so then the butchers also know, oh well, this is where they're all waiting for us, let's take another route.
Yeah. And how can I actually hide the fact that there are cars in the truck? It's kind of hard to hide, right? Everyone can see it. Like having a truck with cows.
No, no, no. These are highly concealed. So sometimes they are not openly taken necessarily at all. So they are fully like they are container trucks, which
Uh-huh.
usually are used to transport, let's say, furniture or goods, heavy goods. So they are
Oh, yeah.
fully contained, which is why
Uh-huh.
they are airless. There's no breathing room
Yeah.
inside.
Yeah.
Right, so they are enclosed completely.
Uh-huh.
Sometimes they are very creative as well, and you have to be if you're doing something risky and illegal. So oftentimes they will take them in milk trucks. So it just looks
Oh,
as though
really?
someone's transporting milk.
Ah.
Sometimes one vigilante told me that they stopped the school bus. The school bus they had taken the seats off, and they had just jammed the
No
bus with
way.
cows.
Ah, so it's
So it
really hidden.
looks
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so it looks
Yeah.
like this is just a school bus going,
Yeah.
but you never know.
So what is the reason that the government just doesn't say, let's build legal slaughterhouses and build a big beef industry and take the taxes from it, and then we get rid of all this illegal market which is going on, and all the lynchings and the killings, and we get a lot of labor of people who are now doing illegal stuff. Why don't they just legalize it?
Because that would require admitting that dairying requires slaughter.
Yeah.
And dairy is so tightly linked to the Hindu identity, right? And it's so a lot of the two main animal-based products in a vegetarian diet, eggs and milk, are not really linked with slaughter because
Mhm.
you don't need to slaughter the animal to get the product. In fact, you can only get the product if the animal is alive.
Yeah.
So this would actually jar so much. It would be too confronting, and it is just linked too much with the Hindu identity.
Mhm.
And they need this. Then how will they have this narrative that the Muslims are doing it? The Muslims are
Yeah.
doing it illegally. So they
Ah.
actually need this to be underground anyway, because then they can say that, can you see all these Muslims are illegally,
Yeah,
engaging in
it's
slaughter.
fueling the extreme right narrative, the extreme right groups.
Exactly, exactly.
Ah,
And I think
yeah,
there's also a broader sort of ignorance beyond the Hindu, right? There's also a broader sort of ignorance about how, most people don't know. I didn't know either. Like, that eggs and milk are linked with animal slaughter. Like that was a shock when I realized it,
mm,
and I also realized this at the same time as I got into this research in 2014, and that's when I became vegan. But most people have no conception that milk is linked to slaughter, because the narrative is exclusively around beef. Even
yeah,
leather is very clearly a byproduct. So people just think, oh, we are not directly responsible. We are second
yeah,
removed, we are third removed,
yeah.
not directly
Yeah,
associated.
yeah, and then you get a very, I would say, paradoxical situation in which I believe left wing people in India tend to eat beef meat so that they can show that they have solidarity with Muslims and with the lower castes. Did I
That's
understand that
right.
correctly?
Exactly,
Yeah,
perfectly. So that's so what happens is, of course, when there's an ultra nationalist, almost fascist politics, which is lynching the
yeah,
constructed other, in
yeah.
the Muslims, etc. Then there is a movement in India which came about at that time, and it was called hashtag not in my name. Like
Uh,
these killings are not in my name. Like I don't support it. Okay, I
yeah,
don't support these Hindu cow vigilantes lynching Muslims and raping them and killing them. I don't support it. It's not in my name. Not in my name. And it is obviously um, a well-intentioned movement wanting to demonstrate solidarity, because it is not in my name. But what they have sort of not understood is that, and so what they do as a part of showing that solidarity is that they will actually, I've had a lot of like forward thinking, progressive, justice oriented, left leaning Hindus who will tell me that I never used to eat beef and now I do, because I want to show solidarity.
yeah,
And this is where the problem arises, and Naisa Gidave talks about this in her book, and she really presents a very, she basically gets the crux of the problem when she says, what is the problem when we start consuming beef to show solidarity? Because showing solidarity is not a problem. We should be showing solidarity.
hmm
to these, segments of the population that are being so brutalized. Of course we should be showing solidarity, but the mode of showing solidarity matters. Why is it problematic to consume beef to show solidarity? I mean, obviously there is a very obvious animal rights issue,
Yeah.
right? But also, by consuming beef, we are giving beef the same importance that the Hindu right is,
Yeah.
right? We are giving it the same. We haven't depoliticized beef by consuming it. We are actually adding to how political it is,
And
because we are saying,
you think it should be depoliticized?
yeah, yeah. I mean, because depoliticized very much from, I mean, from an animal perspective, but depoliticized also from stripped of its caste associations, its race associations, because then you can actually see products for what they are and what the animal undergoes in its production,
Yeah.
what milk undergoes in its production. And milk is also politicized, but differently politicized in India, because
Yeah.
milk is very much linked to the Hindu identity, but it is seen as something which is nourishing and, linked with mother,
Yeah.
right? As a
So right now, if you are, let's say, a vegetarian in India, you can very well be associated with the right wing extremism.
Yeah, increasingly that is the case. So, if
Yeah.
you are a vegetarian, um, people might associate you with your, you're, or are you like, a sympathizer, a right-wing sympathizer. And well, that is sometimes the case with like left-leaning activist crowds. The vegetarianism is also fairly common in India. It's not it's not the by no means the dominant diet. I think statistics will are quite varied on this, but anything like 20 to 30% of Indians are vegetarian.
Uh-huh.
Now, vegetarianism is a very flexible concept. There's no clarity on what vegetarianism means.
Yeah.
So some people might eat eggs and say they're vegetarian, and some people will not regard that as vegetarian. So for
Okay.
them, eggs should be out of the diet, but milk might be okay. Some people will eat fish and then still call themselves vegetarian. Some people will eat meat once a week and call themselves vegetarian because you're only eating it once a week. So it's a very
Okay.
flexible, mutable definition. There's no clarity on what vegetarianism necessarily means. But
Yeah.
typically, I think in the main, it is definitely associated with seeing the consumption of milk and eggs as okay and legitimate.
Yeah, yeah. Must be a very paradoxical situation for you and for animal activists who want to improve animal welfare or less or veganism, and then they are often associated with these cow protection movement, which sounds great, the cow protection movement, which actually is not so much about animal welfare. How do you distinguish the two
Yep.
kinds of being an animal advocate?
That's a really tricky situation for animal activists in India to be in, because they're treading a very fine line.
Yeah.
And many of them will actually use the same tactics as cow vigilantes, and they have been using them for a very long time, even before the vigilantes came into the picture, like stopping trucks and getting the animals off the trucks and seizing the animals. And I've talked to a lot of activists about this, and because as elsewhere in the world, the wins for animals are so small, right? Like the battle is constantly not just uphill, it's almost vertically steep, right? And any type of wins that are possible for animals, they want to seize it. And here is a country where it actually has a cow slaughter prohibition, which is so unique. And they're like, well, we have a law like this,
Yeah.
why won't we use it? Why won't we use it?
Yeah.
And they are using it for the animals, but of course, it's a law that is born out of deep-seated sectarian, communalist, fascist,
Hmm.
casteist landscapes.
Yeah.
But it is one law that they can actually legitimately use for the cows, at least, right? So they will use it, and yeah, they're treading a very fine line
Yeah.
there.
So I guess the tough question for animal advocates in India is whether they should want to legalize cow slaughter so that at least all the horrific transportation conditions, well, can be erased, and that there could be a slaughter facility next to the dairy facility, and at least it makes the end of the cow's life much better. Or if you want to maintain these cow slaughter bans.
I don't know that the maintaining of cow slaughter bans is going to help the cows anyway. It isn't. Like, look at India, number one beef country in the world, number one dairy producing country in the world, one of the leading producers of leather in the world. So it hasn't helped the cows. Like, the cow slaughter bans haven't helped the cows at all because we have an extremely efficient underground economy.
Hmm.
Extremely efficient.
Hmm.
Like, it is machine like efficiency, right? So the cow slaughter bans haven't helped anyway. Um, and even things like, legalizing transportation. Like, I've seen, transport trucks in Australia, for example, and they're, it's a large country and they're traveling from one end to the other. And I mean, there is no way that these segments of production are anything but traumatizing for the animals. So, because I've got activist friends here who are part of the animal save movement, and they will, they look at, they bear witness, and they hold vigils outside slaughterhouses and bear witness to the trucks coming in. And the animal save movement is problematic in many ways and does great work in many ways. So it's a fraught movement, but at the same time, what they will tell me, quite empirically, the ground realities, the animals are so resistant, and I've seen this even in India, so resistant to enter the trucks because they quite literally have to be beaten. In India, I've seen them pushing rods into, their vaginas to force them to get into the
Oof.
trucks. And
Yeah.
even here, they are really beaten, whipped, etc., forced, corralled into the trucks. Once they're in the trucks and they're taken to the slaughterhouses, they don't want to come out because they know
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
knows, right?
Yeah.
They know that they are that much closer. So they saw that the truck that they were resisting getting into, now they're resisting coming out of. And um and and at these safe vigils, when they are actually downloading these animals, the cruelty in just downloading the animals it's difficult to even hear what they do to the sheep and the pigs, etc., to force them out of the trucks. And this is in Australia. So there is no,
So
it's still horrific and it's still traumatic no matter what mode is undertaken. And I think here is where we need to start being really daring, and we need to have radical imaginations, radical
yeah.
alternatives, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times we just think, oh, we need to stop this,
Yeah.
but then what comes after? Like,
Yeah.
what does the world look like after? We need to
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
solid imagination of what the world looks like after.
So shall we try to go there a bit, to the post dairy future? Because I think we should start. I looked it up. The dairy consumption has fourfolded in the last 3 decades in India, mostly due to very active politics and stimulation of the dairy industry.
Hmm.
Um, what do you see this haltering at some point? Do you feel like the growth of dairy will be stopping anytime soon? And are people eager to use any dairy alternatives?
The the dairy industry is in a glut the world over. So every country has an excess of milk. So what they
Mhm.
actually do is dehydrate the milk. It's stored as milk powder, and then they will mix it with water and then send it back into the market. Every country has a milk glut, like there's just an excess production of milk in the country. And the reason why dairying has really gone up in India is because, traditionally dairy was not really a part of Indian diet at all. Um, it's actually because of really aggressive marketing. And now it is really difficult to find, even vegetarian food without any dairy. And even in states and cultures that never used to consume dairy, like northeastern India, barely consume. There's no history, there's no culture of dairy consumption, and now the dairy consumption has gone through the roof
Yeah.
because of the activities of not just the dairy industry and the advertising of the dairy industry, but even the work of the Hindu right, because it's considered to be a Hindu product. And this is
Ah.
their way of sort of establishing Hinduism and Hindu political sort of structures through the countries through encouraging dairy production. So it is really aggressive, and it's a big massive industry. Now, in thinking about alternatives and thinking about what next, now this is a very, there's a really robust discussion and literature just in the sort of vegan studies world around, what this could look like. And there is, all these, questions about, do we need alternatives. Do we need substitutes? Do we need, dairy substitutes or meat substitutes? And will that work? And these are, I mean, everything is expensive to start with, but of course, even the dairy industry is only viable because of the heavy subsidies it has
Yeah.
got. So is it that, people need some substitutes to transition out of what they know? But we also need to bear in mind that our plant food sector is broken as well. It's completely broken. I mean, our entire food production system worldwide is broken. So it's not just about transitioning from an animal based to a vegan based food production system. We also need to really clean up our plant based food production system.
Hmm. Hmm.
you know we really need to go back to, and this has been an ongoing farmers rights movement in India anyway. Going back to indigenous forms of production, going back to indigenous grains and pulses, and which are actually cohesive with the local environment, which are actually good for the soil, which actually consume less water. And these are the kind of transitions we need to make anyway.
Yeah.
Like if you look at India's cashew industry, it's one of the largest cashew um, producers in the world, and it is rife with human rights abuses,
Oh, really? Yeah.
with child rights abuses, because it uses a lot of child labor. Now, the cashew skin, when you peel the cashew skin, it's quite acidic. So it's when you're working directly on peeling cashew skin, you get skin burns,
Oh, really? Yeah.
right? Yeah. So it's
So
a
there's something to
deeply
be solved there at the same time.
It's a yeah,
Yeah.
and so you can actually clean it up, make it lucrative, and that happened in a way with jackfruit industry,
Uh-huh.
the
Uh-huh.
jackfruit sector in India, because jackfruit is very, very widely produced in the state of Kerala, for example, and much of the jackfruit production was just rotting,
Mhm.
right? Because there was just too much that was being produced; it was just rotting, until the vegan industry kind of took off in the West, and suddenly jackfruit became a pork
Ah,
substitute, and it was possible to export all this jackfruit,
yeah.
right? So it is actually possible to create alternatives, to create imaginaries, to create sort of new and deeply creative food systems that are cohesive with the environment. So I think when we talk about a radical alternative, we need to go beyond transitioning out of um, animal based food production into radically reimagining
Hmm.
plant based food production
Hmm.
as well,
Hmm.
because that system is also so broken.
Yeah. Yamini Narayanan, thank you so much for explaining all that to us. For the people who are looking at the interview right now on YouTube, I hold up your book. I know we didn't even come to talk about not even 10% of your 400-page book. I did my best to drag you along all the chapters of your book. Uh,
You are amazingly thoughtful and attentive to as much of the core ground that you needed to cover. So, thank you. You've been amazing.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, Yamini, where can people find you if they want to know more about your work?
So, I'm based at Deakin University in Melbourne, and
Yeah.
I do have a public profile on the university page. I'm also on Twitter, and I'm also on
Okay.
LinkedIn. So, and pop
Great.
in and say hello on any of these platforms, or send me an email, and I'll always be happy to engage.
Fantastic. All right. So I'll put all that information in the show note as well as the link to your book, Mother Cow, Mother India. Well, Yamini, have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Esther, for your time, and thank you for such an engaging conversation.
Thank you.